Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Lean Business Agility. Today with Cliff Hazell from Spotify. Hi Cliff.
Hi Klaus.
Thanks for spending a couple of minutes with me and we want to chat a little bit.
Yeah.
What do we want to chat about?
Well, I believe you wanted to talk about the Spotify model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about the Spotify model with you, but why? Who are you? Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Cliff Hazell, and I've been working at Spotify now for about 3.5 years. Before that, I was in South Africa, and I've done a variety of different things. And at Spotify, my day job is being a coach chapter lead. So I work with a number of the other coaches, helping them, and then working with some of the leads around the different areas of the company.
Yeah, we hear a lot about the Spotify model, right? But what I understand from the Spotify model, it's not the model actually, but it's more like that you guys have a culture to come up with a model like this. So that's basically my understanding. But what do you think about the Spotify model?
Well, the first thing that I think about it was that it was created in 2012. Which I think is an important thing to remember. Paper was written quite a while back, and in some ways it was descriptive of parts of how the company was working at the time. Obviously, it doesn't tell the whole story. There's a lot that's changed. These kind of things. And I don't think it would have been possible to capture the entire way that Spotify works in one single document or diagram. Organizations are more complex than that. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell. Basically, it was just a case of let's try to describe how we're working, see if people resonate with us, and that's where it started.
Okay, but companies are adopting the Spotify model from 2012, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
So what are these companies actually doing when they are adopting the Spotify model?
Well, I've seen a variety of different things that people are doing, and on one hand, you get a lot of people just kind of renaming different roles, maybe introducing some different concepts like matrix management, these sort of things. And I'm always curious, like the questions that I usually ask at the beginning are, well, what problem are you trying to solve with these things? What's the goal here? If you have the same problems we have, maybe the model will work for you in that sense, or some of the solutions that we tried. But I'm not sure that everybody else has the same problems that we had back in 2012. So.
Okay, but Spotify is still one of these companies that, where a lot of people say, okay, that's what an agile company is. So if it's not the Spotify model that makes you agile or great, what makes Spotify great?
Well, I think it's a little bit different, and it's one of those things that's kind of tricky to explain what's behind it. But essentially, I talk about it as like this sort of, we want to be the best at getting better. And it's less about how we're actually running today and more about the mechanisms for improving. And those are obviously a lot harder and a lot more challenging, but I think there's a lot of different factors. So, for example, I think one big part of it is cultural safety. You need to be able to feel comfortable to fail and try things. That's a very important part. You need to have the technological systems to be able to do that. And you probably need some people with a bit of experience in doing some of these sort of things to be able to notice certain mechanics. Are we optimizing for flow, or are we optimizing for resource efficiency? What kind of changes do we have? What are the consequences of those changes? A lot of different ways to think about it depending on the type of problem you're trying to solve. But the key factor is really that you try to identify a problem and then come up with something to try to experiment to make it better. And if you keep doing that enough times, you end up with something that maybe looks a little bit like a paper we wrote in 2012.
Okay, so if it's not the Spotify model, then it's maybe the agile methods you're using. I mean, we see quite a lot of methods like Scrum, Kanban, Save, Less, More, whatever. So we co-trained in South Africa.
Yes.
Kanban training.
Yep.
So can we assume that Spotify is doing Kanban all the way in the company, everywhere?
I'm not sure that any part of Spotify is doing the same thing everywhere. I mean, there's such a variety, and I think that's the thing that's important about it. One of the lenses that I like to look at it through is sort of, there's a couple of different models. You could look at sort of complexity in Cynefin, or you could look at something maybe like Wardley mapping, where they talk about different modes of, pioneers, settlers, and town planners. These kind of models, I think, are interesting ways to look at it. So depending on the type of work you're trying to do, maybe you use a different approach. And I think that's something that's not really captured so much in, for example, the papers from 2012. I don't think our thinking was necessarily advanced as it is now back then. But now we think about it a little bit differently. So, maybe if you're doing something a little bit more like, suited to Scrum or to Kanban, you use that sort of a thing. We use a lot of other stuff and we borrow from different companies where it's helpful. But try to understand the problem that you're trying to solve with it first. And is it applicable to the situation that you're looking at? Because I think that's more important than the solution.
Okay, so there's no single truth, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, it would be great if it was, because then you would just sell one silver bullet and everything would be great. But in practice, the world is more complicated than that. So, yeah.
Damn it.
Keeps it interesting.
Keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is we need to kill all these agile methods, if I understand you correctly. I mean, we probably don't need to kill them, but we should view them as a source of inspiration, and we are allowed to think, and we can apply whatever fits to our context. Is this, yeah? Yeah.
I mean, there's two things that I like. I mean, I spent some time as a consultant, so I learned this answer of like maybe or it depends. Context is king. In certain specific contexts, something is applicable. In others, maybe not so much. And I think in some ways the other one is this sort of idea of all models are wrong, but sometimes they're useful. So, if you treat something like a method or an approach as a springboard or a kickstart for it, maybe that's a way to start solving it. I think a lot of people start with Kanban or with Scrum or something like this, and then they learn what else they need to solve, because often the problems, are not just the surface level things. It's not just the something in the squad or the team. It's not obvious problems always. So if you want to start to expose those and figure out what they are, maybe a method will be a good place to start, but I don't think it's going to solve all your problems and certainly not be the fix in the long term. So, yeah.
Okay. So you say it's all about being the best at getting better?
Sure.
Yeah. That sounds totally awesome, but can you give our watchers 3 sentences what they can do starting from tomorrow to be the best in getting better?
I think the most important thing is to carve out some time for improvement, and whether that means some sort of retrospective or post-mortem. One of the key factors of this, I think, is to be able to do it at all levels of the organization. It's very often that I see people start something like this and they start, like you were saying earlier today, for example, we do this agile transformation, okay, you go and do it now. That's not very helpful if that's how the management approaches it. There are many different areas of the organization that can benefit from changing, and so that's the one thing. If you were to take one thing away from agile methods, I would make it retrospection. Yeah?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
Thanks, Cliff.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so what are we going to do now? So we are at the Lean Campus Central Europe conference here in Hamburg, and I think there's beer outside.
Sounds like a good idea.
So, thanks again, and
pleasure.
Cheers.
Bye.